Here is a question most people are not asking right now. When a missile hits a gas facility in Qatar, why does a family in Ohio pay more for groceries the following week? When a drone strikes a refinery in Saudi Arabia, why does a small business owner in Texas suddenly get hit with higher shipping costs on goods that have nothing to do with oil? And when a 21-mile-wide waterway in the Persian Gulf gets shut down, why does the stock market in Seoul, South Korea, crash by 12% in a single day? These are not rhetorical questions. These things have all happened, right now, in real time, in the past 11 days, and the answer connects missiles to mortgages, bombs to bread prices, and a war thousands of miles away directly to your wallet. This is the story that is not being told loudly enough. And today on Unlocked History Hub, we are going to tell it. Because here is the part that genuinely concerns me when I look at this situation closely. The world's economy was already under stress before a single missile was fired on February 28th. We were already dealing with tariffs rattling global trade. We were already dealing with inflation that had not fully cooled down. We were already dealing with a Federal Reserve that wanted to cut interest rates but had no clear runway to do it safely. The global economy was, in the language of economists, a system with very little slack. Not broken, but not strong. And then we dropped this war right into the middle of it. Former IMF chief economist Maurice Obstfeld said something this week that cuts right to the heart of it. He called this the nightmare scenario. Not a difficult scenario. The nightmare scenario, the one that kept American policymakers up at night for years. The one that made them urge restraint on Israel every single time this conflict threatened to boil over. And now, we are living inside it. Before we go further, if you have been watching Unlocked History Hub for a while, you already know this channel does not read you the morning news and call it analysis. We go deeper. We connect the dots. We look at what is actually happening and what it means for real people. If that is what you are here for, hit that like button right now and subscribe if you have not already. Every week this channel is committed to giving you the real picture. The connections the headlines miss, and the analysis that makes sense of a world that often seems completely out of control. All right, let's get into it. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and striking dozens of military and nuclear facilities. Iran responded with everything it had: ballistic missiles, hypersonic glide vehicles, waves of attack drones targeting American bases in Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, and Kuwait. But the single move that sent the deepest shockwave through the global economy was not a missile. It was Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz. And if you are not fully clear on why that one decision matters so enormously, let me give you the sharpest possible picture. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway, about 21 miles wide at its tightest point, sitting between Iran and Oman at the entrance to the Persian Gulf. Every single day, approximately 20 million barrels of oil flow through that passage. That is roughly 20% of the entire world's daily oil supply. Add to that the enormous volumes of liquefied natural gas, and you are looking at a choke point that, if closed, has no replacement anywhere on Earth. MIT Nobel Prize-winning economist Simon Johnson said it directly this week. There is no excess capacity anywhere in the world that can fill that gap. Not the United States, not Canada, not Norway, no one. 20 million barrels a day simply vanishes from the global supply chain, and the entire world feels it immediately. That is exactly what happened. Within the first week of the war, Brent crude oil surged 28%. By the second weekend, it crossed $100 a barrel for the first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. At its peak, oil reached nearly $120 a barrel on Monday, March 9th. Gas prices at the pump in the United States jumped from around $2.90 per gallon before the war to $3.54 per gallon within 11 days, a rise of more than 17% in less than 2 weeks. Qatar, which supplies roughly 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, declared force majeure on its gas exports after Iranian drones struck its facilities. European natural gas prices surged up to 50% in a single day. Saudi Aramco's Ras Tanura refinery and export terminal, one of the largest crude export hubs on Earth, shut down entirely after being struck. Iraq and Kuwait were forced to cut oil production because Gulf storage was filling up faster than tankers could move the oil out. The entire system, from production to storage to shipping, seized up within days. Then the fertilizer problem emerged. And this is the part of the story I think is genuinely alarming for long-term food security, and the part that the news cycle moves past too quickly. Up to 30% of the world's fertilizer exports, urea, ammonia, phosphates, and sulfur, normally pass through the Strait of Hormuz. These are the chemicals farmers worldwide apply to their fields to grow the food that feeds billions of people. Obstfeld warned this week that the effects on agriculture will be most devastating in low-income countries where productivity is already strained, and that this added cost could create the prospect of significant food shortages, not in years, potentially in months. Because fertilizer disruptions do not show up in the grocery store the day they happen. They show up in the harvest 6 months later. And by the time people see those empty shelves or those price spikes, the war will have moved on in the news cycle. But the damage will still be unfolding. Now let me walk through the specific damage that is already confirmed across different countries and economies. South Korea's Kospi stock market dropped up to 12% in a single day on March 4th, its worst crash since the 2008 global financial crisis, forcing automatic trading halts. Why South Korea specifically? Because South Korea imports approximately 70% of its oil from the Middle East. This was not market psychology. It was a real, physical threat to their fuel supply. Thailand's stock exchange imposed emergency curbs after an 8% single-day drop. Japan's markets fell sharply. China, the world's largest oil importer, drawing roughly half its total energy from the Gulf, is facing a supply shock with very limited ability to substitute quickly. The Philippines introduced a 4-day work week specifically because of the fuel crisis. Let that sink in. A government of over 100 million people told its citizens to literally work less because they cannot afford to run the economy at full power. Egypt's President El-Sisi declared his country in a near economic emergency, warning of growing inflation. Egypt imports massive quantities of food and fuel. Higher global oil prices are not an abstraction there. They are the difference between a functioning economy and a crisis. Djibouti's finance minister warned that developing nations that depend on maritime trade risk being pulled into deeper economic uncertainty as shocks ripple out from the region. More than 80% of global trade moves by sea. When those sea lanes become active war zones, freight costs spike, delivery timelines collapse, and every country that depends on imported goods absorbs those costs. That is almost every country on Earth. Here is my honest read of the most underappreciated danger in this entire situation. The global economy came into this war already carrying 3 separate major stresses: the aftermath of COVID-era debt loads, the ongoing impact of aggressive tariff policies disrupting trade flows, and residual inflationary pressure from the Russia-Ukraine energy crisis of 2022. Each of those alone was manageable. But economists talk about something called a compounding shock, where multiple stresses hit a fragile system at the same time, and the combined effect is not just added together, it multiplies. The IMF stated this week that every sustained 10% increase in oil prices pushes global inflation up by 0.4% and cuts global economic output by up to 0.2%. We are not looking at 10%. We are looking at 28 to 70%, depending on where prices stabilize. Bloomberg Economics warned that for Europe, sustained high energy prices would push the continent to the brink of recession. For the United States, the Fed would be caught in what Bloomberg described as an impossible position, a war that pushes inflation higher while there is political pressure for lower interest rates. Those two forces cannot coexist, and when central bank policy gets stuck in that contradiction, it is ordinary people, borrowers, homeowners, small business owners, who end up paying the price. President Trump said on Truth Social that short-term oil price increases are a very small price to pay, and he believes prices will fall once the Iran mission concludes. I understand the political logic of that statement, but Nada Sanders, a supply chain professor at Northeastern University, said markets are at panic levels right now. The Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington noted that after the first week's modest price moves, The situation deteriorated sharply over the second weekend, when it became clear the disruption would not be short-lived. With Iran appointing Mojtaba Khamenei, reportedly an even more hardline figure than his father, as the new supreme leader, and with demands for unconditional surrender on the table, I do not see a fast or clean path to de-escalation. The longer this continues, the more severe the global economic damage becomes. That is not pessimism. It is what the data is showing. Qatar's energy minister warned oil could reach $150 a barrel. Goldman Sachs projected $100 oil if the disruption lasted 5 weeks, and we are already 11 days in. At $150 a barrel, we are talking about a shock comparable to 1973, the Arab oil embargo that tipped the American economy into recession, created gas lines from coast to coast, and fundamentally reshaped energy policy for a generation. I am not saying that outcome is guaranteed. I am saying it is no longer a distant hypothetical. It is a real scenario that serious financial institutions are actively modeling. And the fact that it is being modeled at all should be enough to make people pay very close attention to what happens in the next few weeks. So here is what I want to leave you with, because I think it matters. The Iran war has already reached into the daily lives of people who live nowhere near the Middle East. It has already reached the gas pump in Oklahoma, the grocery store in Minnesota, the stock portfolio of a retired teacher in Florida, the factory floor in Seoul, the rice fields of India where export shipments are frozen at ports, and the household budget of a working family in the Philippines who just lost 1 day of income per week because of an energy crisis they had no hand in creating. War is never contained. It radiates outward through markets, supply chains, currencies, and commodity prices. And it always hits hardest the people with the fewest resources to absorb the shock. The honest truth is that no one, not the IMF, not Goldman Sachs, not any analyst on any channel, knows exactly how this ends or how long it lasts. The variables are too many and too volatile. What I do know is that the decisions being made in war rooms right now are simultaneously reshaping the economic reality of every ordinary person on Earth who fills a gas tank, buys groceries, or works in a trade-connected economy. And that reality deserves to be front and center in how we talk about this war, not buried at the bottom of a news article underneath the missile strike count. I want to hear what you think. Do you believe the global economy is resilient enough to absorb a prolonged disruption to Gulf energy supplies? What do you think governments should be doing right now to protect people from the economic fallout? And is there a part of this story that your local news has not covered that you think more people should know about? Drop it all in the comments below. I read every single one, and the best conversations I have had on this channel started right there. If this video gave you something real to think about, share it with one person today. Not everyone has the time to dig into the details, but everyone is feeling the consequences right now. Help someone understand why. That is exactly why Unlocked History Hub exists. Stay sharp, stay curious, and I will see you in the next one.